She stepped into the precinct wearing a beige sweater and sensible shoes, invisible to the veteran detectives who never bothered to look up as she collected their discarded files. What these hardened investigators couldn't know was that the quiet woman they'd forced to analyze their impossible murder case had once been the FBI's most brilliant forensic mind, the very legend whose techniques they studied in training. But would they recognize her genius before the killers claimed their next victim? Detective Jack Reynolds slammed the case file onto the desk, causing the woman in the plain gray cardigan to look up from her computer. "Wilson, right? I need these crime scene photos analyzed by morning. The chief says you're all we've got since Peterson's on leave." Maggie Wilson adjusted her simple-framed glasses and nodded quietly, her expression revealing nothing as she accepted the folder. She opened it carefully, her unremarkable appearance making her nearly invisible in the bustling police station. "Just focus on the blood patterns," Reynolds continued, not bothering to hide his disappointment. "And try not to overthink it. We already know the husband did it. We just need the evidence to match." As he walked away, Maggie heard him mutter to another detective, Tim from admin filling in at forensics, "We'll be lucky if she doesn't contaminate the whole case." She waited until he was out of sight before examining the photos with practiced precision. Her fingers moved with subtle expertise as she arranged the images in sequence, immediately noticing details the investigators had missed. The blood spatter told a different story than the one Reynolds wanted to hear. That evening, as other officers filtered out, Maggie stayed, hunched over the microscope. The janitor nodded at her as he mopped nearby. "Working late again, Ms. Wilson?" "These samples need attention," she replied simply. "Detective Reynolds is tough on everyone," the janitor offered. "Don't take it personal." Maggie smiled slightly. "I've dealt with worse." What neither mentioned was how Reynolds had introduced her to the team earlier. "This is Maggie from admin. She'll be pretending to be our forensics tech until we get a real one back." At midnight, Maggie completed her analysis. Her report contradicted every conclusion Reynolds had already drawn. The husband couldn't have committed the murder. The evidence pointed to someone else entirely. Someone still hunting. She hesitated before printing her findings, remembering why she'd walked away from forensics 5 years ago. After what happened in Boston, she'd promised herself never to get involved again. Too many nightmares. Too many bodies. Too much lost. Yet here she was, about to challenge a veteran detective who already thought she was just a secretary playing with science. Thunder crashed outside as rain pelted the station windows. Maggie placed her report in Reynolds' inbox and gathered her things to leave. As she reached for her umbrella, her phone buzzed with a text message. "Unknown number. Nice to see you working cases again, Dr. Wilson. I missed our game." Maggie froze, her heart pounding. Nobody here knew her real identity. Nobody knew she had once been Dr. Margaret Wilson, the FBI's leading blood pattern analyst who had tracked the notorious Whitefield killer across 3 states before disappearing from the forensic world entirely. Nobody except the killer himself. Reynolds stormed through the station the next morning, waving Maggie's report in his hand. "Wilson, where's Wilson?" he shouted, his face flushed with anger. Maggie looked up from her desk, where she sat reviewing additional crime scene photos. She had barely slept after receiving that text message, spending the night checking her locks and scanning street corners. "This report is garbage," Reynolds announced, standing over her desk. "You're claiming our prime suspect couldn't have done it because of some fancy blood analysis? You're just an admin temp." Other officers stopped what they were doing, watching the confrontation unfold. Maggie remained seated, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "The blood pattern indicates the attacker was at least 6'2". Mr. Davis is 5'9", she explained, and the angle of the knife wounds suggests someone left-handed. Mr. Davis is right-handed." Reynolds leaned closer. "And where exactly did you learn to analyze knife wounds, Wilson?" "Some crime show marathon." Before Maggie could answer, Captain Sarah Brooks stepped between them. "That's enough, Reynolds. Wilson's report goes in the file like any other." "But Captain, she's not even certified." "I said enough." Brooks turned to Maggie. "Wilson, my office." Now, inside the captain's office, Brooks closed the door and studied Maggie for a long moment. "Mind explaining how an administrative assistant can perform expert blood pattern analysis?" Maggie hesitated. "I took some courses." "Some courses," Brooks repeated, unconvinced. She pulled out a folder from her desk drawer. "So, I made a call to my friend at the FBI this morning. Imagine my surprise when she mentioned a Dr. Margaret Wilson who used to lead their forensic psychology unit. Same height, similar age, but with different hair and no glasses. This appeared 5 years ago after nearly catching the Whitefield killer. Maggie's carefully constructed world began crumbling. Captain, Brooks held up her hand. I don't care why you left the FBI, but I do care that we have a killer targeting women in my city. 3 victims in 6 weeks. She slid crime scene photos across the desk. Another body was found this morning. Same signature as your Whitefield cases. Maggie's hands trembled as she examined the new photos. The distinctive wound pattern was unmistakable, precise, almost surgical cuts followed by one rage-filled stab. A calling card she knew all too well. Reynolds doesn't know who you are, Brooks said quietly. Nobody does except me. But we need you, Dr. Wilson. Whatever you're running from caught up to you anyway. Maggie's phone buzzed again. Another text. Did you like my latest work? I made it special for you. She looked up at Brooks, her decision made. The killer who texted me is not the one who committed these murders. How can you be sure? Brooks asked. Because the Whitefield killer is still in maximum security prison, Maggie replied, her voice tight with certainty. These murders are committed by someone who knows his techniques intimately. Someone trying to draw me out. Outside the office, Reynolds waited, watching through the glass as the unassuming woman in the gray cardigan transformed before his eyes, her posture straightening as she pointed to details in the photos that only an expert would recognize. Who is she really? He asked the officer beside him. No idea, came the reply. But whatever she's saying has the captain looking scared. Rain pounded against the windows of the conference room as Captain Brooks addressed her team. The murder board displayed photos of 3 victims, their wounds identical in their precision. Maggie stood quietly in the corner, still dressed in her plain cardigan, watching as Reynolds paced impatiently. This is Dr. Margaret Wilson, Brooks announced, gesturing toward Maggie. She'll be leading the investigation from now on. Reynolds stopped pacing. The admin temp? You can't be serious. Brooks handed him a file. Dr. Wilson was the FBI's top forensic psychologist before her retirement. She's tracked this killer before. All eyes turned to Maggie, who stepped forward and removed her glasses. Without them, her gaze was sharp, focused, nothing like the meek woman they'd dismissed for weeks. The killer calls himself an artist, she explained, pinning a new photo to the board. He believes the human body is his canvas. Each cut is deliberate, each wound symbolic. Reynolds crossed his arms. And why should we trust you? You've been lying since day one. Detective Reynolds, Maggie replied calmly. While you were calling me a secretary, I identified 3 evidence markers your team missed. The partial fingerprint on victim 2 that your text dismissed is smudged. It's a perfect match to skin cells found under victim 3's fingernails. She moved to the board with newfound authority, the room falling silent as she detailed the killer's methodology with expert precision. The transformation was so complete that several officers exchanged uncomfortable glances, suddenly aware of how badly they'd misjudged her. Later, as teams dispersed to follow leads, Reynolds cornered Maggie in the evidence room. Why hide who you are, he demanded. Why work as an admin when you could have been solving cases? Maggie carefully sorted through evidence bags before answering. 5 years ago, I got close to catching him. Too close. He retaliated by targeting my sister. She survived, but barely. She looked up, meeting Reynolds' stare. I walked away because people around me got hurt. So why come back now? I never left, she said quietly. Every department I've worked in had active cases matching his profile. I tracked him from the shadows while staying invisible, exactly where he wouldn't look for me. Reynolds processed this information, his expression softening slightly. You've been hunting him all this time. He's been hunting me too, Maggie replied. The difference is, I know how he thinks. As they spoke, Officer Jenkins rushed in, breathless. Dr. Wilson, we found something at the latest scene. It was hidden inside the victim's hand. He held up an evidence bag containing a small silver charm, a paintbrush. Maggie's face paled. He's accelerating his timeline. The next victim is already chosen. How can you know that? Reynolds asked. Because the charm is how he marks his next canvas, she explained, her composure finally cracking. And there's only one reason he'd be this bold. From her pocket, Maggie pulled out a worn photograph of herself with another woman. Similar features. Same smile. My sister just moved to this city last month. She's a nurse at Memorial Hospital. The station phone rang, and an officer called out, Dr. Wilson? Emergency room at Memorial is asking for you. They say your sister just came in for her shift and found a silver charm in her locker. White hospital corridors stretched endlessly as security guards escorted Maggie and Reynolds through Memorial staff areas. Emergency lights flashed, the hospital on partial lockdown after the discovery in Emily Wilson's locker. Nothing on security cameras, the head of security explained. The charm just appeared, like someone who knew the building left it. Emily sat in the break room, her resemblance to Maggie striking despite her blonde hair. When she saw her sister, she stood quickly. It's happening again, isn't it? Emily asked, her voice barely steady. Maggie embraced her sister tightly. We'll catch him this time. I promise. Reynolds watched the interaction with newfound understanding. The brilliant forensic psychologist hadn't been hiding out of fear. She'd been protecting the people she loved. Back at the station, the team gathered around a new case board Maggie had created. Where the previous board had been chaotic, this one displayed methodical organization that revealed patterns invisible to them before. The killer chooses victims who resemble important women in his past, Maggie explained. Mother, teachers, early rejections. Each murder is both punishment and art to him. Reynolds, now working alongside her rather than against her, added, all victims were attacked during shift changes at their workplaces, times when security is most vulnerable. He's meticulous, Maggie continued. He plans for weeks, sometimes months. But with Emily, he's breaking pattern. It's personal now, which means he'll make mistakes. As the team dispersed with new assignments, Reynolds approached Maggie privately. I need to apologize. You were doing your job, she interrupted. Questioning an unqualified admin temp would be exactly what I'd expect from a good detective. Reynolds shook his head. No, I was being a jerk because you're a woman who challenged my theory. There's a difference. Their conversation was interrupted by Captain Brooks. We got something. Hospital security found unusual access card uses last night. Someone entered through the loading dock using Dr. Matthew Parker's credentials. He claims he was home all night. Parker, Emily gasped from across the room where she had been giving her statement. Matt's been helping coordinate my transfer to Memorial. He has access to my schedule, my locker number, everything. Maggie turned to Reynolds, her mind racing. Parker, what's his background? Reynolds quickly pulled up the doctor's information. Matthew Parker, 42, chief surgical resident. Been at Memorial 8 years. Before that, he did his medical training in Boston. During the same time you were working the original Whitefield case. I need to see his personnel file, Maggie said urgently. Within minutes, they were examining Parker's hospital ID photo. Average looking, with rimless glasses and a forgettable face. I interviewed hundreds of medical personnel during that investigation, Maggie said, studying the image. He could have been one of them. Emily leaned closer to the photo, then suddenly stepped back. Maggie, I know him. Not just from the hospital. He was there that night, the night I was attacked. He was one of the doctors who treated me in the emergency room. The realization hit Maggie like physical blow. He wasn't copying the Whitefield killer. He was learning from him, studying me through my sister. All units to Memorial Hospital. The dispatch radio suddenly blared. We have a code blue. Dr. Matthew Parker was just spotted entering the East Wing with surgical tools and unauthorized access to the restricted floor. Reynolds grabbed his jacket. What's on the East Wing? Emily's face drained of color. The children's ward. I'm scheduled to start there tomorrow. Without another word, Maggie grabbed her weapon, her quiet disguise completely abandoned as she transformed into the legendary agent who had tracked killers across continents. He's not after more victims, she said with chilling certainty. He's setting a trap, and we're already running late. Police sirens wailed across the hospital parking lot as tactical teams surrounded Memorial's East Wing. Inside, emergency lighting bathed the corridors in an eerie red glow. The children's floor had been evacuated, leaving behind an unsettling quiet broken only by the soft beeping of abandoned medical equipment. Parker disabled the security cameras, Reynolds reported, checking his weapon as the SWAT team assembled. We're going in blind. Maggie adjusted her bulletproof vest, her transformation complete. Gone was any trace of the meek admin assistant. Her eyes were focused, movements precise. The legendary forensic psychologist had fully emerged. He wants me, she stated plainly. The others were practice. This was always about finishing what he started with Emily. Captain Brooks approached with the building plans. East Wing has 4 exits, all now covered. No patients remain on the floor. Maggie studied the layout, her expert eye catching details others missed. He won't be near exits. Look for interior rooms, preferably surgical spaces where he'd have access to his tools. Reynolds glanced at her. You're not going in. He won't talk to anyone else, Maggie replied. 5 years tracking this man gives me insights your team doesn't have. 5 years hiding from him, you mean, Reynolds countered. Maggie's expression remained calm, but her voice carried steel. I wasn't hiding, detective. I was hunting. There's a difference. Before Reynolds could respond, his radio crackled. Sir, we found something. Pediatric Surgical Bay 4. There's a message written on the window. The message, written in surgical marker, was simple. Dr. Wilson, our masterpiece awaits completion. He's recreating my sister's attack, Maggie realized. Same scenario, same setting. He wants to finish what he started. We can wait him out, Brooks suggested. Tactical has the building surrounded. Maggie shook her head. He's prepared for that. This is an impulse. It's the culmination of years of planning. She removed her vest, handing it to a shocked Reynolds. What are you doing? He demanded. He'll expect me to come as the FBI agent, she explained, taking off her watch and emptying her pockets. But that's not who caught his attention in the first place. Maggie pulled her hair back into a simple ponytail and retrieved her plain glasses from her pocket. Before their eyes, she transformed back into the unassuming woman they had so easily dismissed. Give me your radio in 10 minutes, she instructed. If you hear anything suspicious, come in, but not before. Reynolds reluctantly handed over his radio. This is exactly what he wants. Yes, Maggie agreed, but not how he expects it. She turned to Emily, who stood trembling beside a police cruiser. I need your hospital ID and nursing scrubs. Emily immediately understood. You're going in as me. The person he really wants, Maggie confirmed, taking the items from her sister. As she prepared to enter, Reynolds grabbed her arm. Why did you let us treat you like that? All those weeks, the comments, the disrespect. Why didn't you say something? Maggie smiled sadly. Sometimes being underestimated is the greatest advantage one can have. She looked toward the hospital entrance. He never saw me because men like him and Parker never truly see women like us. That's why I'll catch him today. She slipped through the heavy doors alone, disappearing into the red-tinged corridors where a killer waited to complete his twisted masterpiece. Pediatric Surgical Bay 4 stood at the end of a long corridor, its windows darkened. Maggie moved quietly, dressed in her sister's scrubs, hospital ID swinging from her neck. The squeak of her practical shoes against the polished floor echoed in the emptiness. Nurse Wilson, a smooth voice called from a darkened doorway. Right on schedule. Dr. Matthew Parker stepped into view, still wearing his white coat, looking remarkably ordinary, the kind of face that blended into crowds, forgettable by design. Only his eyes betrayed him, cold, calculating, watching her with artistic assessment. You've been expected, he continued, gesturing toward the surgical bay like a maitre d' showing a guest to their table. Though I must say, your sister usually wears her hair differently. Maggie kept her expression neutral, channeling the administrative assistant everyone had overlooked. You left me a message. Indeed I did, Parker smiled. 5 years in the making. Did you like my recent work? I've been perfecting my technique since Boston. Maggie took a step closer, noticing the surgical tools laid out on a nearby tray. Why now? Because you stopped looking, he replied, his smile fading. You were supposed to chase me, Dr. Wilson. That was our dance. But then you disappeared, became nobody. It was disappointing. So you killed 3 women to draw me out, Maggie said, her voice steady despite the horror. Parker tilted his head. I created 3 masterpieces to remind you of our connection. Art requires sacrifice. As they spoke, Maggie subtly surveyed the room, noting the exits, the potential weapons. Parker had prepared meticulously, but his arrogance created blind spots. He saw her as prey, not predator. You know what fascinates me most? Parker continued, picking up a scalpel and examining it under the light. How easily they all dismissed you. I watched you at the station. Detective Reynolds treating you like a secretary. Officers ignoring your insights. His smile returned. Men can be so predictably blind, can't they? Yes, Maggie agreed, taking another cautious step. They often miss what's right in front of them. In one fluid motion, Parker lunged, grabbing her arm and pressing the scalpel against her throat. Like how they missed me standing right beside your sister 5 years ago, stitching up the wounds I created. I was the one who saved her, Dr. Wilson. Poetic, don't you think? Despite the cold steel against her skin, Maggie remained eerily calm. You made one critical mistake, Matthew. Oh, enlighten me, he whispered against her ear. You believed your own mythology, she replied. You saw yourself as the artist, and me as your canvas. But you never considered that I might be painting a picture of my own. In that moment, Parker noticed the radio at her waist. The volume turned up, transmitting every word to the teams outside. His momentary confusion was all she needed. Maggie twisted away, using the self-defense techniques she'd mastered at Quantico. The scalpel clattered to the floor as she drove her elbow into his sternum with precise force. Parker staggered backward, shock replacing his smug expression. You're not as meek as you pretended. Neither was any woman you've ever underestimated, Maggie replied as the doors burst open, Reynolds leading the tactical team into the room. 1 month later, Maggie stood before the FBI director in Washington. Her badge and service weapon returned to her after 5 years. Welcome back, Dr. Wilson, the director said. Your undercover work tracking Parker while maintaining your cover as an administrative assistant in multiple police departments was unorthodox but remarkably effective. Reynolds, who had accompanied her to the ceremony, looked genuinely surprised. Undercover? You mean the FBI knew where you were all along? Maggie smiled. Sometimes the best place to hide is in plain sight. Parker was watching for the legendary FBI profiler, not the quiet woman pushing paper and making coffee. Later, as they walked through FBI headquarters, Reynolds shook his head in amazement. All those times I talked down to you were exactly what I needed to maintain my cover, Maggie finished. Though your apology coffee for the next month is still appreciated. As they passed the FBI's Wall of Honor, a newly installed plaque caught Reynolds' attention. It showed Maggie in her full FBI regalia, the inscription reading, Dr. Margaret Wilson, her greatest weapon was being underestimated. Will you miss it? Reynolds asked. Being invisible. Maggie watched new recruits pass by, several young women, among them glancing at her with undisguised admiration. Her legend had already spread through the bureau, the agent who caught a killer by becoming the person no one sees. Sometimes our greatest strength lies in what others perceive as weakness, she replied. The world is full of Parkers and Reynoldses who look at a woman in a simple cardigan and see nothing worth noticing. Reynolds winced at being grouped with the killer. The difference, Maggie continued with a forgiving smile, is that you learn to see clearly. Some never do. She touched the plaque briefly. And that's precisely why they never see us coming.